Hi there, and welcome to the Entrepreneur's Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Shulamit Berlev Tov, and I'm the Entrepreneur's Therapist. You can call me Shula for short. My pronouns are she, hers. This is the podcast for business owners, solopreneurs, micropreneurs, freelancers, and self-employed folks who want support for riding the emotional roller coaster of running a business. My mission is to mitigate the entrepreneurial mental health crisis that has been talked about in the business press since at least 2018, so that's prior to COVID, and to transform the entrepreneurial ecosystem to include the whole human founder as a business priority. I do that through this podcast, of course, and also through speaking, teaching, and consulting, and by supporting women business owners one-to-one to prevent burnout and preserve their peace of mind as they ride the emotional roller coaster of running the business in an era of relentless stressors that can make you want to lose your crap on the daily. This podcast is being recorded on lands that have been stewarded for 10,000 years and to this day by the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Land acknowledgements are calls to action from Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and this is your call to action to find out whose land you're on, at least, and share that with others, and to take what other actions you can toward reconciliation, because the harms caused by settler colonialism are ongoing. Today's topic is the 7 challenges of business ownership and how to overcome them. Mental health for business owners is directly tied to business success, and yet we entrepreneurs go through the ringer with our emotions. It's a roller coaster. One morning, something's going well and you're on an emotional high and you think, frig, yeah, that's why I do this. But then in the afternoon, something tanks and you're circling the drain emotionally and you think, that's it. Nothing ever works out. I'm burning this shit down. Many of the people I have worked with come to me with this experience and asking me what's wrong with them. They're confused about why, as strong, capable, competent entrepreneurs and leaders who have ridden every kind of wave imaginable, they suddenly can't cope like they used to. In my work, I've identified 7 factors that are unique to the experience of entrepreneurship that impact mental health for business owners and make our lives and work so much more stressful than that of the general population. So I invite you to listen in to see if there's anything here you recognize. And you can check the show notes for details and references so you don't have to take notes. Isolation is the first on the list of challenges that affects mental health for business owners. It's the issue most women business owners I know and work with talk about. Social isolation is a major risk factor for suicide. Evidence links perceived loneliness and social isolation with depression, poor sleep quality, impaired executive function, and cognitive decline. It's easy to see why this is a challenge to business owners and to their businesses. Nearly 70% of first-time CEOs who experience loneliness report that the feelings negatively affect their performance. Entrepreneurs are isolated because there are simply fewer business owners around and even fewer women business owners. It's much easier to find someone with a difficult work situation or a micromanaging boss with whom to commiserate. It's harder for us to find someone who gets us. It's also lonely at the top. Stuff comes up for leaders about the people they lead, employees, contractors, clients. It's not appropriate, and in fact, it's harmful to the relationship to expose these people to the stuff that comes up for us about their behavior, but stuff does come up. We do a lot of emotional labor to manage all this, and yet there are few places to be transparent about this work. Most people are risk averse, but we business owners embrace risk and are frequently taking leaps into the unknown. We mitigate our risks with contingency plans. So what we need is someone who can say to us, yes, I know, of course it's scary. And I know you have what it takes to do this, and I'm here to cheer you on. Rather than the traditional thing that most folks say who have jobs to people who are becoming entrepreneurs, how could you give up the security of a regular paycheck and a pension? How could you do that? We need encouragement and folks who understand. Sometimes we're just too busy or too pooped to socialize outside of networking, where of course you have to be always on. Another isolating factor is the desire for impression management. It's hard to trust that disclosing your vulnerability when you're having a bad day won't deter people from doing business with you. In addition, it's hard to find the right place where you really can let your hair down with people who get you, your fellow entrepreneurs. But what if somebody does figure out you're not okay, in quotation marks? Entrepreneurs are leaders and public figures who can't be seen to have problems. That's the assumption, right? So we may believe we have to hide our problems. And as a result, we can experience shame when we're exposed in a way that's not consistent with the carefully curated representation we've been working to convey. And of course, we carefully curate what we show online with the best of intentions, that is to enable potential clients to trust us. But at the same time, it can be difficult to be vulnerable or to be seen as vulnerable. Lack of access to support is another factor that plays a role in isolation, but it's so important that I'm going to address it separately below. Another aspect of the challenges we experience as business owners are systems of oppression, otherwise known as hustle culture. Much of the stress we experience as women, but discount, comes from systems of oppression that exert invisible but deeply felt and harmful pressures upon us and thus affect our mental health as business owners. We absorb so many truths from these systems without even knowing where they came from, so they affect our mindset. One example of this is hustle culture. Hustle culture is a way of thinking that leads to behaviors that focus intensely on productivity, ambition, and success, regardless of the cost. Now, as business owners, we work hard and we may work smart as well. Nevertheless, it all comes down to us. And there are times when we work more than 8 hours a day, or even times when we push ourselves to work more than is good for us or our businesses, even when we don't have to, because we're caught in the hustle trance. We experience a great deal of stress with the pressure to get clients and make money. This pressure may be real or imagined, but let's get serious. Viscerally, business success can feel like life or death. Institutional expressions of oppressive systems put barriers in the way of our business success, and the degree to which these systems block us depends on how many of our personal characteristics are different from that of the dominant identity. Being middle class, university educated, thin, able bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, white, Western, Christian, or quote unquote secular, but actually Christian, and male. It also depends on how these differences that you experience come together. And I've linked to a great exercise to explore if you've never thought about privilege and the intersection of systems of oppression before. In essence, living under capitalism is traumatizing. White supremacy is at the root of capitalism and all other systems of oppression are connected to it. Racism in all its forms, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Asian racism, the list goes on and on. All racisms, as well as fat hatred, ableism, ageism, misogyny, misogynoir, heteronormativity, transphobia, and homophobia are only a few of the systems of oppression that can traumatize the folks affected by them. And when you're a business owner, that makes your journey even harder. The constant onslaught of so-called microaggressions elicits a stress response in our mind and body that is depleting and affects mental health for business owners. Also, these systems of oppression will come to play in our interactions with folks around our businesses, so it can impact our access to money and capital and other forms of financing and support, because the folks in power to provide these supports, to make them available, exercise gatekeeping functions, and their internalized bias, their implicit bias, will have an impact on the choices they make around the provision of these services. What may be more visible is toxic productivity and the extractive focus on production at all and every cost. These are the consequences of living under capitalism and ideas that are drawn directly from the Calvinism of the Mayflower colonizers. And I've linked to a blog post I wrote that lays these connections out in detail. Also, our time is at a premium because of the breadth of responsibility we carry and the pressure to produce. And as a result, we often don't meet our own basic needs, such as eating, drinking, and going to the bathroom. I'm serious. How many times have you said to yourself, just one more email, just one more phone call before grabbing something to eat? When it's a juggling act to get your basic needs met, time for true self-care through activities that soothe, discharge, and nourish the nervous system and restore balance often get pushed to the side. And there's a link here in the show notes on to the activities that soothe, discharge, and nourish your nervous system so that you can refer to those as supports for taking steps to support your mental and emotional well-being as an entrepreneur. VUCA is an acronym that originates from leadership theories, and it was coined in 1987 to refer to the conditions experienced by leaders: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. VUCA, along with constant adversity, challenges, decision-making, problem-solving, always facing new and ever-changing conditions and wearing all the hats, right? CEO, bookkeeper, PR, marketing, admin, customer service, all that takes its toll. It results in cognitive fatigue and the depletion of physical and emotional resources. The most recent and extreme example of VUCA in the lives of entrepreneurs has been COVID. It was sudden, the data and directives were constantly changing, the path and its impact were unpredictable, and there were many forces at play. It was also hard to get a read on things under COVID, but we women entrepreneurs face VUCA every day, and it has a negative effect on our mental health because of the cognitive load. Barriers to professional support are also a challenge to mental health for business owners. Entrepreneurial poverty is a thing. Cash flow is a challenge, right? There have been some months in my business that I wasn't able to pay myself a salary without leaving some of the bills in my business unpaid. We're not all Galen West and Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson, right? We may earn a sufficient living, but we don't always net what we want to, and cash flow can be tough. And finding after-tax cash to cover therapy isn't easy, let alone finding cash to pay support like virtual assistants. And there's a dearth of practitioners. Demand for mental health support has always outweighed the supply, and it's even harder to find someone who gets both mental health and entrepreneurship. Stigma is another barrier. In 2022, The Hustle magazine reported that 84% of the business owners they surveyed said stigma exists around mental health challenges within the business community. In addition, there's a common belief that if we break down, quote unquote, or need support, that there's something wrong with us. We live in a culture that valorizes going it alone. And there's cultural stigma attached to mental health challenges that doesn't apply to physical health challenges in the same way. Can you imagine telling someone who's drowning that it's just in their lungs and to get over it? But people with depression and anxiety receive either implicitly or explicitly messages like just get over it or pull your socks up and get going on a regular basis. Business owners with mental health struggles are told unhelpful things as well, like you're lucky you're the boss, or, oh, you're just on the beach earning passive income, or just work less than if you're so stressed. Or if it's burning you out so much, why don't you just get a job? And so we're not met in our experience of difficulty, and that it isolates us and increases our stress. It's a barrier, right? Other kinds of professional support are also important to our mental health. It's not all about having a therapist. DIYing everything is stressful and exhausting and affects your mental health as a business owner. But without sufficient cash flow, we can't access the business support that would alleviate so much stress, like VAs, graphic designers, coaches, bookkeepers, website security experts, etc. This is, the stress of having to manage these things and do these things that we're not trained to do and not skilled to do is a barrier to our well-being and a challenge to our mental health and our businesses. Linking self-worth to success is something that comes up often as a challenge for business owners. This is really a common human foible. We connect our sense of self-worth with our role, and then when the role shifts or we lose the role, we don't know who we are anymore. And we haven't got stories to tell ourselves about our success that help us feel good about ourselves. It's even more the case that entrepreneurs, and especially values-driven entrepreneurs, identify closely with their business. So successes and failures toss them around emotionally. One of the many problems with the concepts of self-worth and self-esteem is that they are comparative and depend on performance. Researcher Kristin Neff has determined that in order to be able to see ourselves positively, people buttress themselves and their sense of their self as worthy by locating themselves in relation to others who are either below or less than they are, right? So you're here and they're there. You're above and they're below. Self-worth or self-esteem depends on both performance. In other words, success allows you to tell yourself good things about yourself. And it also depends on comparison. In order to be able to feel good, you have to be above somebody else who's below you in comparison. And this is human. We all do this. But what happens when we don't have good things to tell ourselves about ourselves? What happens when we perceive ourselves as being in the one down position? Well, I'm sure you know, the inner critic uses this as fuel for its fire, and then we feel really bad. Self-kindness and self-compassion serve mental health for business owners much better. At its simplest level, when things aren't going our way, this involves saying to ourselves something like, oh man, I'm having a hard time. Let me just take a moment here. Maybe taking a breath. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. And no wonder. What I'm trying to do is hard. It's scary. It's distressing. It's stressful. You can insert whatever emotion word is coming up for you that relates to your experience. And I've included a link here with more information about self-esteem and self-kindness, where you can read more about this. But when we are kinder in the way we talk to ourselves, we can divorce our self-worth from business success and failure and escape from some degree of the emotional volatility that accompanies entrepreneurship. Ironically, research has shown that people who are kind to themselves, especially when they're struggling, perform better on all sorts of measures. One of the great gifts of mindfulness in relation to our self-esteem and our tendency to link our self-worth to success is that when we are mindful of our thoughts and our experience, we can come to understand that we are not our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. It's a human tendency to believe our thoughts and to take them for true. Eastern concepts of anatomy consider, though, that we have 6 sense doors. The traditional 5, the Western 5, right? Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body or touch, and the mind. Eastern concepts of anatomy consider the mind a sense organ. We would never think that sensory data like smell, taste, hearing, touch, and sight determines our reality, right? For example, we would never confuse ourselves with the bite of pizza in our mouth. We would never take a bite of pizza and then, based on the sensory data from your taste buds, think, I'm pizza. And so it's strange that we don't think that sensory data determines what's real, determines who we are, but we confuse ourselves with our thoughts all the time. We think I'm a failure and we believe it to be true. Now, like all the other references in this podcast, in the show notes, there are links to more information. Making a mistake does not define you as a failure. And there's a link in the show notes to more information about this and an exercise that you can use to help yourself if you're in a moment of so-called failure. We can't believe everything we think. Making a mistake does not define you as a failure. Another challenge to our mental health as entrepreneurs is our predisposition to mental health challenges. Research conducted both in the US and Canada has documented the mental health challenges experienced by entrepreneurs. We entrepreneurs are also more likely to come from a pool of people in the general population who are predisposed to mental health challenges. In his research, Michael A. Freeman, a psychiatrist and psychologist who could be considered the grandfather of research into entrepreneurship and mental health, found that people who are on the energetic, motivated, and creative side are both more likely to be entrepreneurial and more likely to have strong emotional states. And those states may include depression, despair, hopelessness, loss of motivation, and suicidal thinking. So I've listed 6 challenges to your mental and emotional well-being as an entrepreneur: isolation, the hustle, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, barriers to professional support, linking self-worth to success, and our predisposition as entrepreneurs to mental health challenges. But there's a secret or invisible 7th factor. These previous 6 factors all potentiate one another. They make each other more powerful. They intensify their effects. That fact is often lost on us. I have heard clients say to me over and over and over again, "What is the matter with me? I can handle anything. I've been rolling with the punches for years. Why am I losing my shit now?" The truth is that the effects of chronic stress accumulate, and each new stressor exacerbates poor mental health for business owners. Things combine in such a way that, like mixing drugs and alcohol, each element has its own impact, and furthermore, makes the impact of the others more powerful. Now, you might be saying, "Oh, come on. These 7 factors aren't unique to business owners." And you'd be right to say that. But what's unique about these things and entrepreneurship is that while non-entrepreneurs experience many of them, they don't come together for people who don't own businesses in the day-to-day in the same way that they do for entrepreneurs. These are our working conditions. These are the things we face every day. So is it any surprise that we, quote unquote, break down? So if you take nothing away from this podcast, except this one thing, I will be happy. And I hope that it will make a big difference to you. There's nothing wrong with you. We are conditioned to think that if we break down, in quotation marks, something's going wrong. But I invite you to consider that if you break down, something might be going right. What's wrong is we're taught that stress, burnout, depression, and anxiety are the exceptions, not the rule. But mental health challenges are inherent in entrepreneurship. So when we hear that stress, burnout, depression, and anxiety are exceptions, by implication, if we experience them, we've somehow failed. But that thinking is flawed. We have to recognize that as entrepreneurs, mental health risks are inherent in entrepreneurship. And like all other risks we face in business, we have to control for them. This way of thinking is key not only for our own sanity, but also to destigmatize mental health struggles and open the way for ourselves and others to access support. We must also recognize that no matter how much we anticipate and plan, no matter how many mitigation strategies we put in place, sometimes the challenges will overcome us. Failure is also inherent in entrepreneurship, but failure isn't truly failure. Failing to learn from failure is certainly a missed opportunity, though, and there's a link to more information. If you're rolling your eyes and going, "Oh yeah, failure, mistakes aren't mistakes and failure isn't failure," I invite you to click the link in the show notes to learn more about my point of view on failure and how and check how that might land for you a bit differently. But when challenges overcome us, When we experience failures and we struggle to recover, this is where support comes in, because we're stronger with support. Part of your business planning should include emergency preparedness. And while breaking down might not exactly be an emergency per se, the analogy holds when we think of contingency plans. To make it through emotionally when the shit hits the fan and to thrive afterwards, the supports need to be in place. Trying to find and put in place the appropriate supports in the midst of a crisis is near impossible, and your mental health will suffer in ways that can be avoided. Having ongoing support in place. So all you have to do is book an appointment, or better yet, just show up at the regular appointment that's already on the books, goes a long way toward helping you weather the storm with your sanity intact. And there's a variety of supports that include, but aren't limited to, having a therapist who understands business. It can be peer support. It can be your mentor, your coach, your business bestie. Having a business bestie can be a really, really powerful support. So I've listed in this podcast a number of supports that, as you go through these 7 factors, you might be able to use to help yourself as you face them, as they come up. And again, all the details are in the show notes and you don't have to worry about it. Just click the link in the description. This podcast is brought to you by my self-guided virtual retreat. And speaking of contingency plans, this will help you create your customized mental and emotional wellness plan to keep your CEO self in the driver's seat so you don't flip your lid and blow up your business when the crap hits the fan. As you know, and as I've described in today's podcast, running a business can run down your mental health. And as whole humans who own small businesses, a mental health plan should be part of your business strategy. You can boost yourself, your mental and emotional well-being, and your business with a mental health plan. And you can purchase the self-guided mental health plan virtual retreat today. It's $99 and includes the workshop recording, an enhanced transcript PDF, and worksheets. The link to purchase is at entrepreneurstherapist.click/MH plan, and that link is in the description as well. I'm the Entrepreneur's Therapist, and I'm on a mission to mitigate the entrepreneurial mental health crisis and transform the entrepreneurial ecosystem to include the whole human, that's you, in business. If you've gotten something valuable from this episode, you can support my mission by sharing it with friends you think need to hear it. Subscribing, rating, and reviewing also helps mitigate the entrepreneurial mental health crisis by making it possible for this podcast to reach more stressed out entrepreneurs who need support, validation, and tools to help them care for their mental and emotional well-being in this era of relentless stressors that can make you lose your crap on the daily. Thanks for listening. I look forward to connecting with you next time.